There are topics that hardly anyone dares to talk about, and sexuality in old age is one of them. They are kept silent about it, hide it, treat it like something shameful, as if lust, desire, and the body no longer have the right to exist after a certain age. But what if I told you that the renunciation of sexual relations does not only affect the body, but also the soul? What happens if you no longer have sexual relations in old age? Do you extinguish internally, or do you free yourself? Sexuality in old age is not a banal topic, but a vital one. It's not just about sex, but about desire, about human touch, about connection, and about the meaning of life. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've wondered if you're still desirable, or if you just want to better understand this deep phase of life, then this topic is for you. Old age is not a punishment, but a phase of revelation. Many fear it because they believe that the essence of life, desire, energy, passion, is fading. But ancient wisdom teachings and modern thinkers agree on one point. Sexuality in old age is not just a physical act, but a mirror of the soul, an expression of vitality, connection, and meaning. For thousands of years, wise men have known what science is only slowly confirming. Sexual energy is not a mere driving force of the body, but an expression of life energy itself. In Eastern traditions, such as Taoism or Tantra, this energy, called Qi or Kundalini, was considered a current that flows through the entire body, nourishing not only lust but also health, mental clarity, and spiritual longevity. For her, aging did not mean losing this energy, but directing it more consciously and wisely. Sigmund Freud called this force libido, the center of our entire psychic existence. For him, it was not only sexual desire, but also love, creativity, will, and urge to live. And here lies an inconvenient truth. When sexuality is extinguished, the will to live, to research, to create, often also ceases. And in a society that no longer sees old age as desirable, a silent risk arises. One begins to see oneself as powerless, sparkless, without magnetism, not because of age, but because one has forgotten that desire is timeless. When you stop allowing sexuality, tenderness, or even fantasy, you often lose the joy of life, the inner spark that makes existence alive. It's not about living obsessively with sex or chasing youthful illusions. It's about recognizing the power of emotion that moves us inside. Not having sex doesn't kill, but it cools you down, and what gets cold hardens, breaks, dies inside. A person without touch, without desire, without connection, alienates himself not only from the other, but also from himself. When the inner fire is extinguished, the only thing left is survival. But we are not born just to survive, but to vibrate, to shine. There's a big difference between having a body and really inhabiting it. Many people stop feeling at home when they get older. Wrinkles, scars, hormonal changes, all of this makes some, especially women, feel alienated from their bodies. They begin to hide, to no longer look at themselves naked, to believe that their bodies are no longer worth touching or desiring. This alienation is dangerous. A body without tenderness, without movement, without closeness becomes something that can only be endured, and that has an effect. The body needs touch, warmth, and presence, not only for physical health, but also to stay connected to the soul. Studies show that physical contact activates brain regions associated with trust, well-being, and self-esteem. A simple, loving touch, a long hug, can reduce stress, boost the immune system, and promote a sense of belonging. But what happens if this contact disappears for years? The body feels abandoned, and with it the soul. Some old people do not die of physical illnesses, but of something invisible. Of tactile loneliness, emotional coldness, the long absence of a loving gaze or a tender touch without haste, without demand, only out of closeness and humanity. When the body is no longer touched, it falls silent. And in this silence, the soul also begins to fade. The joy is lost, the feeling of identity, the deep connection to the human inhabiting one's own body in old age does not mean having the same energy as in youth, but staying in touch with it, feeling it as a sacred space. It means recognizing that the body, even if time has left its mark, is still worthy of experiencing tenderness, pleasure, and presence. Do not leave your body, for it has never left you. He was your companion, your home, your tool, and he deserves love until his last breath. With the disappearance of erotic identity, the feeling of existence also disappears. From an existential point of view, sexuality is not just a biological function or a fleeting desire. It is a language of the soul, a silent confession. I live, I am there, I vibrate. In adolescence, this language is loud. The body speaks, screams, demands. In old age, however, it becomes a whisper, a gentle, intimate melody, quieter but no less powerful. The problem is that many stop listening. Erotic identity means not only sexual activity, but the inner feeling of being a desiring and desired being. Knowing that you live in the gaze of another, that you are able to trigger a smile, a touch, a tremor. It is a way of recognizing oneself in the world. People don't just want to be useful, they want to be felt. When sexuality disappears not from conscious decision, but from forgetting, shame, or social pressure, an essential dimension of the self is lost. Many people stop looking at themselves in the mirror with desire in old age. They no longer dress for joy, they no longer touch each other lovingly, they no longer play with life. They begin to see their bodies as a mere function, not as a living, sacred space. Over time, the playful, the seductive, the tender disappears, the erotic dissolves, the masculine, the feminine, the androgynous, the sensual. They go out like a candle in a closed room that has run out of air. The erotic does not disappear from the body, but from the soul when you give it up. Because it's not just about sex, it's about energy, magnetism, about a way of being in the world, with passion in your voice, with joy in your chest, with light in your posture. An 80-year-old woman who feels alive, desirable, and in tune with her skin can be infinitely more erotic than a young woman who is alienated from herself. Likewise, a man who does not have to conquer bodies but maintains tenderness, depth, and presence. When eros disappears without transforming, the soul loses its shape. We are becoming grey, functional, useful, but no longer luminous. And as Carl Jung once said, what is not made conscious appears in life as fate. When one no longer has a sexual relationship and does not replace this loss with other forms of intimacy, art, tenderness, beauty, or human contact, one distances oneself not only from the other, but also from oneself. Then the most tragic thing happens. It is not time that makes us old. It is the forgetting of our inner fire. A sage is not the one who gives up desire, but the one who learns to transform it, to guide it, to dance with it, without fear, without shame, because as long as a spark remains, life remains, and where there is life, the fire can rekindle. Sexual silence is often an emotional scream. Not all older people who no longer have sexual relations do so out of conscious choice. Many submit to an invisible commandment, a silent social expectation. This is no longer for you. At your age, you should be above these things. You've fulfilled your role. Now rest. But this supposed peace is often not peace, but an emotional death disguised as reason. Sexual silence, when it arises not from mature choice but from inner or outer compulsion, becomes a cry that no one hears. A cry that does not come from the mouth, but from the skin, from insomnia, from nameless sadness, from silent fear. Depth psychology knows suppressed desire does not disappear, it transforms into symptoms, diffuse complaints, physical tensions, mood swings, into a gaze that has lost its luster. The body is wise. When he is not allowed to feel, he seeks other ways to express himself, sometimes with pain, sometimes with illnesses, without an explainable cause. The body calls for what the soul does not dare to demand. Many older people carry a feeling of emptiness within them that they cannot name. They were good parents, they worked, took care of others, but now they feel that something is missing. It's not just society that they miss, but a deeper form of connection, the one in which you're seen, touched and loved, not for what you do, but simply because you are. And yet many feel that they no longer have the right to look for it. They fear the judgment of others. They are afraid that they could be called ridiculous, immature, or compulsive. There is a subtle form of violence in this oppression, the violence of denying someone pleasure, even though they are still capable of feeling it. The problem is not having sexual relations. The problem is to live as if you no longer have the right to tenderness, to desire, to touch, to complicity, to those quiet moments that speak through skin and closeness. When desire is denied, suppressed, or ignored, dignity is also extinguished, because nothing is more human than desire to touch, to be touched, to be seen, recognized, felt. When the silence about it comes, the person continues to live, but inwardly he withers. The sages of antiquity knew that desire is not an enemy of inner peace, but its ally. Properly understood and directed, it becomes a tremendous source of vitality. That is why a wise man is not ashamed of pleasure. He honors it, and if he can't live it in physical form, he transforms it into poetry, into a look, into care, into an embrace, into art, into presence. Sexual silence can be a decision, but if it is a resignation, then it is a wound, and wounds that don't have a name don't heal. Sexual relations are not only physical, they are symbolic. For decades, society has taught us to associate sexuality with youth, physical strength, and performance. We were sold a narrow image of eroticism, young, taut, desirable bodies, but that's just the surface. True sexuality, which goes beyond the biological, is deeply symbolic. It is a language with which we say, I see you, I feel you, you are important to me, I am here, without a mask. In old age, the body changes, and so does desire. The intensity becomes calmer, more internal. But that doesn't mean that sexuality disappears. It changes. It is no longer a blazing fire, but a deep, warm ember that needs attention and tenderness to continue to shine. A sexual experience at this stage of life does not have to involve nudity. It can be a hug that stops the world, a hand that gently touches another, a silent look that caresses the face of the other, with mature love, a shared memory that awakens a smile in the soul, a slow walk in which two hands find each other, and the skin feels that closeness is still possible. That too is sexuality. That too is eroticism. Because the erotic is neither pornographic nor mechanical in its essence, it is symbolic. It is the way two souls meet and touch each other, through the body, the word, or the presence. When one no longer has sexual relations, for physical or mental reasons, there is still something essential to preserve, the symbol of human touch, the invisible bridge that connects two people through tenderness, complicity, and silent desire. If that is also given up, the look, the smile, the playful gestures, then not only the sex dies, but the soul of the relationship. Many older people, therefore, feel deeply alone, even if they have a partner. Not because of a lack of company, but because of a lack of emotional connection, lack of symbolic touch, lack of mutual recognition. Sexuality in old age is an invitation to rewrite one's own script, to discover that lust is not tied to young skin, but lives in awareness, intention, and quality of encounter. The wise man does not need solid muscles or foreign desires. The wise man needs presence, the ability to be in the moment with all that he can still feel and give. And if you, who are listening to this, no longer have sexual relations, don't punish yourself for it, but ask yourself, are you still caressing the souls of those you love? Do you allow someone to touch your soul? Because as long as there is connection, Eros also lives. And as long as Eros lives, you live. Creativity and joy freeze when they are not allowed to flow. Sexual energy is one of the most powerful forces of man. Freud, in his deep exploration of the soul, realized that this energy, the libido, goes far beyond the sexual act. It is a life energy that can transform into creation, art, language, projects, and deep bonds. This process is called sublimation. When desire is not suppressed but raised, it is transformed into light. In youth, this fire often seeks its expression through the body, through movement and passion. In old age, however, the body no longer reacts in the same way. But the energy remains. If it can't find expression, it accumulates. An older person who no longer has sexual relations is faced with two paths: to deny, to repress, to forget, or to transform the desire. What happens when erotic energy is suppressed? It turns into frustration, insomnia, gratuitous exhaustion, inner rigidity. Because suppressed desire does not disappear, it becomes a burden. But when it is channeled, the opposite happens. The soul expands. Man begins to paint, to write, to act caringly, to cook with love, to dance with his shadow side, to sing while watering flowers. Creativity becomes the way to make love to life itself. Creativity is eros. The joy of creating, of dreaming, of creating, is a refined form of sexuality. The soul plays with the world. That is why many older people discover new passions when they find their desire again, not necessarily the desire for another body, but the desire to embrace life itself, to touch it with open eyes, to embrace it with words, to permeate existence with gratitude, with beauty, with presence. Old age can be a deeply erotic phase, not through the obvious, but through the essential, through joy, through slow sensuality, through intimate dancing with the moment. You don't need a bed to feel desire. You don't need a young body to enjoy life. You need an open soul and a heart that wants to express itself. Because if you don't allow sexual encounters or creative, playful, or tender forms of expression, then not only does desire go out, the color of the world also fades. What was once fire turns to ashes. But if you turn that energy into art, music, words, care, humor, everyday rituals or tenderness, then you will continue to love, even without sex. And those who love life never age completely. Sexuality is also spirituality. For centuries, spiritual teachings have been misunderstood, as if enlightenment requires denying the body, suppressing desire, silencing pleasure. But the true sages knew the body is a temple, and pleasure is a gateway to mystery. In the sexual act, when it is lived with awareness, devotion and love, the ego dissolves. We don't think, we don't plan, we don't play roles, we're just there, vulnerable, open, connected. It is one of the rare moments when the I disappears and only the we or pure life remains. That is why sexuality is not the opposite of spirituality. It is one of its most beautiful, embodied forms. It is a silent prayer of skin and soul, an act of devotion, of opening, of expansion. As we age, this spiritual aspect of sexuality can become even more intense. There is less rush, less pressure, less noise in the head. The body ages, yes, but the consciousness becomes finer, deeper, more attentive. A single kiss can become a sacrament, a touch, a prayer, an embrace, a holy moment. But when sexuality is abandoned, not of one's own free will, but out of fear, shame, or beliefs that condemn lust in old age, then one also loses this bridge to the transcendent. Many stop feeling each other's bodies, and soon their own too. This is how true aging begins, not when the body wrinkles, but when the soul ceases to wonder, when wonder disappears, when there is no play, no delight, no tenderness left. But as long as you can still feel joy, whether it's through a deep look, an honest conversation, or a touch that says, "I feel you," then you're still inhabiting the temple of life. And this temple is alive, radiant, full of light. You don't need an active sex life like you did in youth. You just need to keep the bridge between body and soul alive, because sexuality is also a way of praying without words. And to renounce this power out of fear, out of shame, or because of social judgments, is to close a door to the mind. So if you can love, then love. And if you can't love like you used to, stroke it. And if that is no longer possible, then remember, honor, thank you. Because as long as your body can still feel, even if only a little, you can touch the sky without leaving the earth. But if you decide to stop having sexual relations, you can get closer to yourself. There is another, quieter truth that is just as valuable. Some people consciously decide against sexuality in old age, without sadness, without regret, without frustration. They do it from a quiet, almost sacred place. And in them, the inner fire does not go out. It transforms when this choice arises from freedom and not from oppression. It opens the way to one of the deepest experiences, the re-encounter with one's own self. Without the need to please, meet expectations, or be desired, the soul begins to speak more clearly. Sexual silence, when chosen in peace, is not a void. It is space. It's a break, a collection, a quiet room where you can finally hear yourself. In this silence, you discover other forms of enjoyment, intimacy with yourself, consciously experiencing time, reading slowly, walking in the evening light, holding a cup of tea with both hands while the world pauses. It is a different pleasure, more delicate, more invisible, but no less deep. In many mystical traditions, the wise withdrew from the world in old age, not out of negation, but out of choice. In this silence, they found a new form of joy, serenity, joy without form, ecstasy without body, fusion with something greater, limitless, eternal. So if you no longer have sexual relations, ask yourself, was it a forced abandonment or a conscious decision? Is there pain in your abstinence or freedom? If there is sadness, then there may still be a repressed desire, a part of you that wants to be seen, touched, embraced. But if there is peace, then what you are experiencing is not a death of desire, but its transformation. The fire that no longer burns on the outside can flare up on the inside, gently burning all that you are no longer, till you are naked, real, still. But in the light, a soul that finds itself in silence does not need bodies to feel alive, it only needs truth. And truth, when it is recognized, is the most intense form of pleasure there is. So what happens if you no longer have sexual relations in old age? The answer is not simple. There is no general truth. It depends on how you live this absence, why it arose, and from what attitude. If you stop being intimate because you believe that you are no longer allowed to do it, that it no longer suits you, then fear directs your life. And when fear takes the wheel, you slide into the back seat of your own existence. You shrink, make yourself small, as if you had to ask for permission to stay alive. And at some point, the world stops seeing you because you were the first to stop looking at yourself with desire. When you lose intimacy because you've been forgotten, because no one hugs you or calls you by name anymore, then you start to fade like a candle without a wick. You are still there, but you no longer warm, you no longer shine. You become a silent presence that no one notices because you, yourself, have begun to feel invisible. And when sexual silence arises from guilt or oppression, the body becomes a prison, no longer a temple, no longer a home, but a cell in which the soul wanders in circles, looking for a window that no one has opened. If you have stopped touching, dreaming, playing, simply because you have become indifferent, then this is not maturity, but indifference, disguised as acceptance, and desire, like every living thing, falls asleep if it is not nourished. With it, emotion, enthusiasm, liveliness, and joy fall asleep. But not everything is shadow. There are also those who consciously renounce sexuality in old age, with mindfulness, with intention, with wisdom. Not because they escape the body, but because they have learned to dance with the soul. These people are not extinguished, they are gathered together, like a fire that burns more quietly so as not to burn, and yet continues to shine. like the sea that retreats, not out of weakness, but to gather strength, to return deeper and farther than ever before. When sexuality changes, without denying, without being abandoned, but by flowing into other forms, it becomes art, music, a touch to be given with your eyes, an embrace of words, a tremor born in a poem, in a melody or in a conversation that touches you to the core. Because the soul also has its own eroticism, and often the most intimate thing does not happen in bed, but in a look that recognizes you, in a presence that does not judge, in a divided silence that feels like a breath. The wise man does not fear old age. He fears to live without passion, without desire, without tenderness. Because it is not old age that extinguishes people, but the separation from their life energy, from this inner fire that does not need permission to burn, but only space to express itself. Here lies a truth that hurts, but also liberates. Sexual relationships in old age are not a duty, but neglecting one's own erotic cosmos, be it physical, emotional, symbolic, or creative, means a dangerous self-abandonment. It's like sending yourself into exile, declaring yourself old prematurely, depriving yourself of the opportunity to continue vibrating, being alive. For as long as there is still something in you that wants to feel, as long as an embrace moves you, a memory seizes you, a word touches you, as long as you still dream of touching or being touched, even only with your soul, then you are alive. Never forget this. The body may get wrinkles, but the soul can continue to dance. The fire changes its shape, but it does not have to go out. As long as you allow yourself to feel, play, enjoy, and love in your way, at your rhythm, you haven't really gotten old. Thank you for feeling. Thank you for not extinguishing your inner fire. And may you always remember, real life does not end with the years, but only when you stop glowing.